You are facing a situation where 99.99% you're going to jail. That's basically, those are the odds. And I actually, talking to the person that was helping me with mitigation, I said, well, if I get convicted, which jail would I go to? And we had talked about me being a Muslim and halal meat. And he says, Otisville, you go to Otisville. And so Otisville is about 2.5 hours from where I live. On a Saturday, I took a drive. I actually called my pretrial officer and I said, I'm going to do a road trip to Otisville, New York and come back. I need your permission. And he says yes, because I was only confined to the state of Pennsylvania. And I drove and looked at the camp from the outside. And it's like, is this a place where I am at peace of being there? I have to be at peace of being there, or I'm going to plea, or I should just not go to trial.
Hello, welcome back. This is Andreea Parc at Alive.Again podcast, a podcast where attorneys and other professionals meet to discuss real life challenges and how our decisions shaped our journeys. Alexa is not with us today because she is in vacation, a very well-deserved vacation after a long year of work. Our guest today, it's a pleasure to have Dr. Muhamad Aly Rifai. He's a psychiatrist, internist, researcher, medical legal expert, founder of SHIELD, which stands for Support and Help in Ethical Legal Defense, and author of Dr. Not Guilty. Thank you so much, Dr. Rifai, for being here with me today. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much for having me talk to your audience and tell you a little bit about my story.
Yes, and your story is actually the answer to my prayers because, ask and you shall receive. I have been talking to a lot of people, attorneys and other professionals who were indicted and either pled guilty or went to trial and lost, including myself. And I had been asking myself and wondering, I know it's a very small percentage of people winning, and I kept asking myself, where are those people? I'm so intrigued to talk to one of them to see their perspective into winning a case like this. And I had the pleasure of finding you on LinkedIn. And I'm so happy that you accepted my invitation to discuss about this.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me to talk a little bit about my case and kind of my journey since the trial and what's for the future, as well as efforts and advocacy on behalf of the justice impacted community and on behalf of physicians in the United States who on a daily basis face legal perils with the shifting regulatory atmosphere that's happening in the United States.
Yes, and that's unfortunate. So I know that a lot of professionals and a lot of people in general, due to fear, they plead guilty. In your case, what gave you the courage to refuse the plea and choose to go to trial?
Just to tell your audience a little bit about myself,
Please.
I am of Syrian ancestry. My family is from Syria. I'm a first generation raised in this country. And I grew up part of my life in Syria during the first civil war in Syria. So I was exposed to a lot of trauma. I was exposed to civil war. I was exposed to killings. I was nearly executed by machine gun fire. And I come from a background of a lot of trauma. And I feel that kind of shaped my view in life and prepared my resilience. I came to this country. I did my residency training. I did a very grueling and intense training in internal medicine and psychiatry. I was fortunate that I actually worked at the National Institute of Health, the National Institute of Mental Health in Bethesda, Maryland, so the top clinical and research institute in the country. and started my own private practice a few years later after settling in Pennsylvania. And I've been in Pennsylvania for almost 20 years now. My life was difficult, had lots of adversity, civil war. I survived almost being afflicted with cancer in my thyroid related to the nuclear fallout from Chernobyl in 1986, and survived lots of adversity through my residency, grueling work. And I feel that that kind of prepared me for what was coming. I feel that I'm a spiritual person, I'm a religious person, I'm Muslim, and you could see that was the preparation from God, how he prepared Moses, how he prepared Jesus Christ, how he prepared Muhammad for them to face adversity. I feel the same thing. The Lord was preparing me for this fight, the United States of America v. Muhamad Aly Rifai. When it came, I feel I was ready, as if I was born, that my destiny was the United States of America v. Muhamad Aly Rifai.
Tell us a little bit of how this case started.
So I told you a little bit about the fact that I worked in a research institute. I did a lot of pioneering work in psychiatry. I did a lot of work on the intersection between medical diseases and psychiatric diseases. I did work on different treatment modalities in medicine. And I also did work on telehealth as early as 2006, when nobody had heard about telehealth. I was doing telehealth in 2006. And so some of that work that I did was pioneering, but that also made me somebody who was different from my peers, my other physician peers or psychiatric peers in my area and as well as around the United States. And the government basically does not distinguish or doesn't like people who are different. So basically, my pioneering work in telehealth, even though it was sanctioned and commissioned by the federal government, by the Center for Medicare Services, came under the watchful eye of the United States Department of Justice. And you know, in 2020, the COVID pandemic happened and shifted all of the medical work to telehealth.
Yeah.
So it shifted from 0.01% of physicians doing telehealth to 99.99% doing telehealth. So basically, it was a significant difference. Everybody was doing telehealth. And then the government, in its wisdom, always wants to ensure, wants to make lessons to the physician communities, to the medical community about regulations and telehealth. And so in 2022, who best to target than somebody who had done telehealth before telehealth was popular? And if they could find something that they could argue, that was basically the message. And so in 2022, they informed me that I was under investigation for healthcare fraud and that my telehealth services were fraudulent. And despite negotiations and despite pleas from my attorney at that time, and with a new U.S. attorney, the federal government just decided to proceed with an indictment for healthcare fraud. I myself and my attorney, we both knew that these allegations were not valid, that these allegations were not valid based on the rules and regulations, based on my work, based on my pioneering work in telehealth. And this kind of where this decision of going to trial and fighting this unjust prosecution came from, is because I knew that what I was doing was correct. I knew what I was doing was valid and legal. And on some of these things, I am the one who wrote the book on some of these rules and regulations. So, needless to say, we talked about that in the trial and we conveyed that to the jury.
Yeah. And did your attorneys or did you educate yourself on the very small percentage of people winning cases in federal court system?
Absolutely. I was very aware that the likelihood of prevailing at trial is very low. In fact, the statistics are abysmal. So, of those who get indicted, and we have data from 2022, we have data from 2024, of those who get indicted, the numbers are around 73 to 76,000 people per year, criminal indictments. Of those who get indicted, only about 0.2%, or close to 1 in 1,000, are found not guilty, ultimately. Of those who go to trial, the chances are a little bit higher. So if you decide to go to trial, in the year that I went to trial, 2024, there was only 1,700 trials around the United States. 1,700 federal criminal trials around the United States. If you put that for each judicial district, there's 93 judicial districts, it's probably less than 20 trials per judicial district. And if you put that on a judge, each judge probably just sees a trial a year.
A year.
There's about 500-600 judges. Maybe a trial or two a year at maximum.
Yeah.
Just to tell you the kind of so judges don't see trials. Judges don't. The art of a criminal trial is a disappearing art. I'm hoping it's going to come back now that there's a lot of people, a lot of prosecutors who left the Department of Justice and opened up their own private practices. Maybe now they're going to start taking people to trial. We'll see whether that dynamic is going to change. But every judge sees maybe one or two criminal trials a year. Every judicial district, every U.S. attorney's office, maybe some more than others, it's around 20 criminal trials per year. So I was lucky also that my criminal defense attorney was very seasoned and had been through many, many state and federal criminal trials. So I think I knew those numbers going in with open eyes. And, when you go through a trial, you have to know that there's the possibility that you could lose and there's the possibility that you could win. But I believed in the strength of the evidence that I was presenting and that the government's case was invalid. And I think the jury heard that.
That's fantastic. I'm wondering, from a mindset point of view, how did you prepare for that?
So basically, preparation is very, very important. I prepared as early as I heard that I was under an investigation. I knew that people who get investigated ultimately get indicted. And I knew that of those who get indicted, very few go to trial and very few are found not guilty. So preparation is number one. So I actually worked with a mitigation specialist, even at the target letter stage. I said, I think I personally believe that I did not do anything wrong, but that doesn't matter. Most of the time, it's what you can deliver to the jury and what the jury is going to think about you. 12 strangers, what are they going to think about myself and about my story? So I'd like to be prepared, and so I prepared. I wrote my narrative. I wrote my story. I prepared as if I was going to submit a plea agreement or I was going to go to trial and be found guilty, and started early preparation with just kind of getting my ducks in a row with how do I put myself in the best possible light for the jury if the jury trial is going to happen, or for the judge if a sentencing is going to happen. So being prepared, I think people need to prepare for all possibilities. Sometimes people basically isolate themselves and live in a separated environment, or they live in dreams that they're going to go to trial and they're going to be found not guilty, or that things are going to turn out okay, and ask their attorney to do everything. But you have to know that you got to prepare. If there's a storm that's coming, there's a hurricane coming, what you do is you board up your house. And this is what you do. You board up your house, you prepare, you buy water, you buy food, you prepare yourself for contingencies. And this is what I did.
That's very important lesson to learn for everyone that comes across this type of experience. I didn't do that. I personally was mentally, emotionally frozen, paralyzed. I could not do anything, and I was in a little bit even more denial. I didn't educate myself. And I thought that if I have two of the best attorneys in New York, that things will turn to my favor, which it didn't.
And
So that's thank you for
this
yeah,
is why I wrote my book, Doctor Not Guilty,
yeah.
which has a lot of information about this, what I talked about. And this is why I started my service, Shield, Support and Help in Ethical Legal Defense
Tell us
is
more about that.
yes. So I started this as a resource for people who are going through legal problems. You know, when you, for example, and I give my field, the psychiatric field, when you feel depressed or you feel that you have adversity, you go see a psychiatrist. But you also see a social worker, you also see a marriage counselor, you also see a medical doctor. So it's not just an attorney. People are under the impression that when you are facing a legal storm, when you're facing a legal hurricane, this is an event that's likely going to disrupt your life for the rest of your life. We now know that actually, this is data from the Journal of the American Medical Association. Those who undergo legal adversities, whether they're indicted, they're arrested, they're jailed, they live shorter lives. They lose years of their life. Not just them, their family members live shorter lives. They compared 3 million people with the general population, and of those who went to jail affected by criminal justice system, were in courts, were indicted, they live 5 years less than the general population. Them,
Interesting.
family members live 3 years less. People think that, oh, this is an event that affects you, affects your family, affects your neighbors, affect your the research also showed
Community,
that
yeah,
the neighborhoods
yeah.
that people come from that were affected by the criminal justice system had a shorter lifespan than individuals from areas that were they're not a collection of people who were affected by the criminal justice system. Yourself, your family members, your neighbors are affected by the criminal justice system. And so sometimes, people talk about the being indicted or being affected by the criminal justice system. And I tell that also to former prosecutors, federal prosecutors, state prosecutors, or current prosecutors who are in the Department of Justice. A decision to indict a person is something that impacts them, their family, their like their neighborhood, everybody. And so unless you're really really sure, you're basically, it's more like a captain of an airplane, and if you indict somebody, you tank that airplane for the rest of their lives. The airplane that has that person, his family, and his neighborhood, with a decision to do an indictment. So I think it's interesting that through my research on my book, I learned more about this information.
So your book is called Doctor Not Guilty, and you present cases of doctors that were not guilty.
Yes.
What common denominator did you find, and what mindset did you find in common with all these people that were found not guilty?
People could tell from my name, and I am Middle Eastern. I am a first generation immigrant. You're also an immigrant. Being an immigrant was the common denominator. Having the grit and having have survived basically coming to this country and being an immigrant is basically a common denominators. Those who survived are people who, whether they're from India or whether they're from the Middle East, they've been exposed to adversity, trauma, and the Goliath of the government of the United States Department of Justice didn't faze them. And so they basically were able to, they say, there's a very famous defendant and philanthropist, and he's a wonderful physician, Dr. Rabothra, who actually wrote a book, USA v. Raj, and is actually doing a movie about his experience. He also had significant adversities because not only did the government, the United States Department of Justice, indict him, they kept him in jail for 3.5 years pending his trial. And then he went to trial and was found not guilty on all charges. So basically, the people who survive are the foreigners who grew in the wilderness of India or in the civil war of Syria. Basically, that's the common denominators, people who were already affected by trauma, and the Goliath of the government of the United States and the United States Department of Justice didn't phase them. They had already faced adversities in life, and that wasn't touching them.
Yeah, it's not easy to see a paper that says USA versus you, your name.
Absolutely,
It's
absolutely,
terrifying.
absolutely,
It's
absolutely.
terrifying. And for the people outside of the system, we have, even me as an attorney, we have an idea of what the legal system is and the criminal legal system. How did you find it from the inside?
People are under the impression that the system is fair. People are under the impression that the American experiment that started, and I tell you that specifically because I live in Easton, Pennsylvania. And Easton, Pennsylvania is a city that's very historical because in 1776, Easton was one of three cities where the Declaration of Independence was read aloud. It was in Philadelphia, it was in Trenton, New Jersey, and Easton, Pennsylvania. That's where I am right now. And people don't know, but five of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were physicians, doctors, practicing physicians. So physicians were there from the beginning in the legal system. And one of the sentences, one of the grievances that why people wrote the Declaration of Independence, they wanted to secede from the monarch of England, was that people were denied trial by jury, which was the bedrock of democracy. People, that's what, at liberty and democracy, that you have access to a trial by jury. Well, the trial by jury has disappeared, has but disappeared. I told you, there's like 1,700, close to 1,700 trials last year, 2024. Interesting that people feel, well, I'm going to go to a jury, I'm going to tell the jury my story, and they're going to basically hear me and they're going to find me not guilty. But the system is basically designed to be not pro defendant, it's pro government. There's an elaborate set of rules and regulations to trial evidence. And the courts have always been on the side of the government in terms of tilting the system toward the government being able to prosecute citizens. There's also one interesting phenomena, which is the judiciary. Judges, the majority of judges now, more than 50% of judges, are former federal prosecutors. So they basically seen the system from the perspective of a prosecutor. So they're not friendly to a defendant. There's no, even the Supreme Court, majority federal prosecutors and not defense attorneys. So the system is different than what you have perceived when you see these shows on TV that it is, you got a jury, you got a Perry Mason moment.
Yeah.
I don't know if people know what a Perry Mason moment is. It's a moment where there is something that happens in the trial that turns around the entire trial. Like the jury is like, not guilty. And I'm laughing because there was a moment like that in my trial. Exactly a moment like that. And even with that, the government decided to continue with the trial, even though the jury started rolling their eyes. And that moment was actually the government's main expert witness, who they brought in to say Dr. Rifai's work, entirety of Dr. Rifai's work, is fraud. And she testified for like 2 hours, and the government thought it was a slam dunk. And then it was my attorney's time to cross examine her, and he dissected her report completely. And at the end of her testimony, she said, I do not support the government's case, nor do I support this prosecution from its beginning of Dr. Rifai. This was their expert. This was the government's expert after 1 hour cross examination from my attorney. So I thought that was a Perry Mason moment. I talk about that in the book. People think that happens. It rarely happens. I was fortunate. The Lord helped me being able to kind of get to that. People need to know that the system is stacked against the defendants, with rules and regulations, with judges and prosecutors, and sometimes even the jury. The jury comes, my attorney says, a federal jury comes to convict the defendant. Basically, that's it. Once the government of the United States says, we are indicting so and so, that's it. You're cooked.
The first thing I've learned in law school here was that this is grand jury, but more or less the same thing, that they can indict a bologna sandwich.
Yes, yes.
So
Yes.
the jury in the trial, yes, it's there to say yes to everything that the prosecution says.
Yes. But
Yeah.
my attorney even made even more fun than that. He says, "Oh yes, and they could indict a halal shawarma sandwich." He was, that whatever it is, even if you think that, oh, just because I'm a minority or from a different religion, even the halal shawarma, they'll even indict more a halal shawarma sandwich than a bologna sandwich or a ham cheese sandwich.
And I'm so happy that your case turned the way it did. And now I have a very interesting question. I know that you've spoken about mental health a lot and you worked with a lot of people. I want to ask you, have you seen any relationship between the emotional struggles of a professional and a decision that they made in their profession that probably resulted in a prosecution?
I see that all the time. I see that all the time. And sometimes the government has no understanding of the circumstances that lead this person who is struggling with mental health issues, who is struggling with drug and alcohol issues, that lead them to basically unintentionally commit criminal infractions. And our government and our Congress has, over the last 30 or 40 years, written lots of rules and regulations, to the degree that not one day passes where an American may violate 2 or 3 federal laws that would put him in jail for 5 to 10 years. Every American.
When we know the book, Three
Yes.
Felonies of the Day.
And so even somebody who's experiencing mental health issues, somebody who's experiencing drug and alcohol issues, most of the time they run afoul of the law, whether traffic violations, whether controlled substances violations, whether issues related to the management of their profession, whether they're an attorney, whether they're a physician, whether they're an accountant. Facing drug and alcohol issues and psychiatric issues can make their judgment clouded and infrequently run afoul of the law. And unfortunately, the government doesn't see that, and they attribute that just to a mere criminal conduct with a criminal intent, while there is significant backdrop of mental health issues, drug and alcohol issues. Part of SHIELD also is trying to highlight that sometimes even psychiatric issues like autism can be a contributor to people not understanding the nuances of the laws, not understanding rules and regulations, and ending up on the wrong side of the law, whether in a state or federal indictment. I got to also talk about a colleague of mine who I've never met, just heard his story, and I wrote it in my book, Dr. Charles Seisman, who's a psychiatrist like myself, who was actually indicted by the United States Department of Justice. This was in 2015 and 2016. He had the courage to go to trial, and he was actually found not guilty of all charges at trial. However, the struggles that he had faced and him having psychiatric problems even before his indictment and before his legal problems kind of accelerated. And even 8 months after he was found not guilty, he ended up committing suicide. So even if you're found not guilty, there's
The
repercussions
damage.
to you is lifetime. I still pray for his soul, for his family, of the things that he went through. And I talked to a colleague who knew him, and he was a gentle, loving soul who did not deserve what happened to him.
It's sad that I'm talking a lot about this. When I got to Danbury, Connecticut at the camp, out of 180 women, 12 were attorneys. The percentage is huge. And I talk a lot about the parallel between mental health and addictions and having a behavior that might result in criminal charges that the government is completely disregarding. So it's the work that you're doing, and that Shield, you only work with physicians?
I can work with physicians. I work with any professional who is
You
facing
do.
criminal legal issues, and I could provide them with an assessment of whether there's any backdrop of mental health issues. I'm board certified in internal medicine, so even medical issues. I'm board certified in psychiatry, so mental health issues, and I'm also board certified in addiction medicine. So if there's medical issues, if there's psychiatric issues, if there's drug and alcohol issues, I can provide a person with the needed help if they're facing legal problems, as well as an assessment whether some of these situations, medical, psychiatric, drug and alcohol, could be used as mitigating circumstances
Might have
for
contributed.
the criminal offense, and to help a judge or even a jury understand
Understand.
what is going through from a medical, psychiatric, or drug and alcohol issues. This is a work that I've done for the last 20 years. I've done work with death penalty cases, even to shed a light on the medical, psychiatric, and drug and alcohol issues on some individuals who were facing the death penalty, and to see if those situations could be used as mitigating circumstances.
And from your experience, have you seen a compassion from the prosecution on seeing those reports?
It all depends on the prosecutors. Some of them are compassionate and understand the gravity of the crime, as well as sometimes the gravity of the circumstances that surround a person being involved in the criminal justice system, both in medical, psychiatric, as well as drug and alcohol issues. And in my area, I'm involved. There is a mental health court in my county. There's mental health courts in Pennsylvania
Oh,
that tend to individuals who have psychiatric issues that are involved in the criminal justice system, and where incarceration is not the answer. Basically, mental health treatment, as well as monitoring with probation, drug and alcohol treatment, medications, therapy, counseling, family therapy are much better alternatives to incarceration than what these
that's
individuals who live
wonderful.
in where there is not a mental health court.
Yeah. From your experience, do you know which states are more lenient on defendants than others?
It varies by counties, it varies by districts. Even in the federal system, it varies. It's different. It is judge dependent, whether the judge has an understanding of the mental health system, whether a judge has an understanding of the psychiatric diseases and medical diseases. So I think it's very important to figure out which judge you're facing and whether they have a good understanding of what's going on, and as well as bringing an expert like myself to talk to the
Yeah,
courts, to provide expert witness opinion to the courts about the involvement of psychiatric issues. Not just, I mean, and not to use them as excuses, but just to describe a
yeah,
phenomena that could be used as a mitigating circumstance or not. I mean, but that doesn't detract from the fact that a psychiatric condition exists, or a drug and alcohol issue exists, or a medical issue that exists in an individual who is involved in the criminal justice system. and whether these circumstances could be used as mitigating circumstances. And we're actually even also seeing that individuals who have severe medical, psychiatric issues or drug and alcohol issues, maybe home confinement would be a better option for them than being in the
Prison
Department
system.
of Bureau of
Yeah.
Prison and Department of Corrections in states.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that some of that being applied in different districts, but it varies from state to state and from federal judicial district to another.
How did this trauma affected you, and how did the resilience in you created this all of this extra work that you're doing for helping people that are in the same situation?
Sure, sure. So I tell everybody when I was facing this circumstance several weeks before the trial, you are facing a situation where 99.99% you're going to jail. That's basically, those are the odds. And I actually, talking to the person that was helping me with mitigation, I said, well, if I get convicted, which jail would I go to? And we had talked about me being a Muslim and halal meat. And he says, Otisville, you go to Otisville. And so Otisville is about 2.5 hours from where I live. On a Saturday, I took a drive. I actually called my pretrial officer and I said, I'm going to do a road trip to Otisville, New York and come back. I need your permission. And he says yes, because I was only confined to the state of Pennsylvania. And I drove and looked at the camp from the outside. And it's like, is this a place where I am at peace of being there? I have to be at peace of being there, or I'm going to plea, or I should just not go to trial. And I looked from the outside, I prayed to the Lord, and I said, I'm at peace. If I am confined in this place, I'm at peace of being here for the next as many years as the court is going to sentence me to be there. I came back with renewed resilience to go to trial. But I went to prison before I needed to go to prison. I encourage people to do that just to figure out, okay, this is where I'm going to go. The people who are involved in mitigation tell you if you get convicted, you have to ask the court to send you to a certain prison, to a certain jail. Your attorney say, please designate him to this jail. Can't happen always, but if you ask, you're probably to the jail of preference where you go, where you want to go. I was ready. And even after the trial, even after I was found not guilty, the trauma didn't end. This wound continued to ooze. And I'm still embroiled in legal issues and legal trouble. Not to me, it's actually to the government. And we are in the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit in several trials. Here from your podcast, probably I will announce that also my lawyer has filed a brief with the United States Supreme Court that we're going to talk about in the next few weeks about opposing what the government is doing to physicians. And I'll publish that once it's in the United States Supreme Court. So the legal issues have not ended. We are in the appeals court, and the appeals court is my motion asking for sanctions on the prosecutors and asking for attorneys' fees and actually supporting the expungement project because I'm asking for expungement of my record. Hopefully that will open up some more avenues for expungement for individuals who actually are convicted and spent time in jail. Maybe if an individual who was found not guilty could get expungement, maybe that will opens up avenues for other individuals with kind of getting their record expunged after they have served their time and served their dues to the community.
That's wonderful. If someone would just receive the letter, what would you tell them?
So if you, and I talk about that all the time, and I talked about that in my book, one of the most, if you read my book and you want one message that you want to get away with, never talk to the police. Keep your mouth shut. And I tell that because I talk to physicians. You know, we physicians, we just talk and talk and talk, and we think that we can talk our way out of things. When federal agents, federal attorneys come to you, They already have the story. They already made up their mind about something. And whatever you're going to say is not going to help you. It never helps. And I talk to people, and it's like people say, well, no, I'm a smart person. Federal agents, investigators, prosecutors, this is all they do all day
Yeah.
long is interrogate people. I tell people, ask General Michael Flynn in the military. He was the head of military intelligence. They interrogated Al Qaeda people. That was his job. In the White House, two FBI agents got him to make some random incorrect statements. And they didn't charge him with any crime. They charged him with the crime of making false statements. What they say, what you say is what they write down. The interviews are never recorded in the federal system. In other systems, like state systems, they're always recorded. It's what the federal agents write their recollection of what you said. And they want to make a case. They're not going to write that everything you said is right. They ask you what color is this wall, and you say maybe dark green and it's light green, and that's it. You made a false statement to federal agents. Even if there's no other crimes, they find no other crimes after lengthy investigations. They get you with making false statements to the
Awesome.
government.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to beat these charges. And so I tell people, just say federal agent, federal prosecutor, detective, I want to cooperate with you. I want to give you my utmost respect. Always be respectful, but let your attorney be your voice in the legal system. Never make any statements. Never, ever, because it never helps. And this was the rule that I followed. I never said anything. I never even testified in my own trial. I let my own writings do all the talking. Like I would send emails to my staff saying, listen, we have to comply with all rules and regulations of Medicare and all the laws. I want you to follow this law and this law and this law. And I let my emails speak for themselves. Because if I had said anything or tried to explain anything, it would have
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it would have been used against me. One message: never talk to the police, never talk to anybody. Even if your lawyer says, "Oh, talk to them," don't talk. Don't say anything. Let your testimony at trial be the one that talks. Now, this is only if you truly think that you are not guilty. If you know that you are guilty of the action that the government is accusing you of, you have to talk to your attorney, and you have a short window of being able to talk about whether what you did is something that the government wants to hear about early, so they would at least give you some mitigation circumstances and not go for high sentences. But if you think that you did nothing wrong and not dilute a decision, never talk to the police.
And now that we're approaching the end, there is one question that I ask every guest, and that is, what is one activity in your life that makes you feel more alive?
I'm a spiritual person, I'm a religious person, and prayer is something that's very important to me and probably what sustained me in all this adversity. Connection with the Lord, connection with a higher power. I posted yesterday a talk that I gave with a spiritual leader. He made a statement from Apostle Paul, who is also Syrian, who's from Damascus, from my country, Syria. And Apostle Paul says, rejoice in suffering. That basically is preparing us for something, whether it's the hereafter or it's preparing us for more adversity in life and in resilience. That even though you feel like, man, how am I going to survive this adversity? Having the mindset of that things are going to get better and kind of rejoice in that and preparing yourself for the next chapters in life, I think is very important because the system is not fair. I can tell you. I mean, I feel even though I went to trial and everything happened to me, the system is not fair. Part of being able to process that unfairness of the system, being able to talk about it and process it is very important. And it's only your faith, your resilience, your belief in yourself, maybe belief in family, belief in a higher, whatever it is, but you have to believe that things are going to get better. And in order to kind of overcome the situation that you're dealing with, but it's always hard. The Goliath of the government of the United States of America v. Muhammad Aly Rifai, and I get reminded of that every day.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rifai, for your time and wisdom. It was a wonderful conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. I wish all the best to your audience. They could always find me on Shield, SHIELD, shield.expert.
That's great. And I will add in the description of the video all of your information where people can find you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our listeners, thank you very much for listening. For more conversations and more guests, please subscribe and follow us. Thank you. We'll see you next week.